Hello, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to Feminisms and the Ethic of Care. I'm delighted to see so many, see so many people virtually anyway, signing online. My name is Suzanne Leonard. I direct the Gender and Cultural Studies program at Simmons University, and I'm also the co-director of the Executive Committee of GCWS. As I said, I'm thrilled to be able to welcome you here this evening. I'll give a short welcome, and then I will hand it over to our moderator for the evening. So this is our first GCWS Feminisms Unbound for the year, titled Feminisms and the Ethics of Care. The Consortium for Graduate Studies in Gender, Culture, Women, and Sexuality is a collaboration between 9 institutions in the Boston area: Boston College, Boston University, Brandeis, Harvard, MIT, Northeastern, Simmons, Tufts, and UMass Boston. We bring together feminist scholars and faculty from across our institutions and more through graduate level courses and myriad events each year. If you are interested in teaching for the GCWS or becoming a board member or otherwise being involved in the work we are doing, please don't hesitate to reach out to our program manager, Stacy Lance, or the faculty representative at your institution, or me. We're really happy to hear from folks. This coming spring, we're going to be offering multiple courses for graduate students of all disciplines, and they are Gender and Sexuality in Asian American Culture, Memory, Identity, and Nation: Perspectives from South Asia and the United States, and Gender and Sport in a transnational context. More information on our events, for how to teach for GCWS, and our upcoming courses can be found online. And some of that information is going to be in the chat for you. We welcome you to engage with one another during this webinar through the chat. Please add any questions for our panelists to the Q&A. We'll pose questions to our speakers after they've each had a chance to present. When applicable, please add who your question is directed towards. You're also able to upload questions that others, upvote questions that others ask. If you'd like to see the closed captioning, please hit the CC button at the bottom of the Zoom. I just noticed that since I've been speaking, we've had about 10 more people join us, which is so exciting. I love watching those numbers on the Zoom, rise. So without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to our organizer, Regine Sean-Charles of Northeastern University, who will moderate our panel tonight. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you so much, Suzanne. I was still muted. We're still getting used to all of this, right? Thank you so much, Suzanne. My name is Dr. Regine Jean-Charles. I am the Dean's Professor of Culture and Social Justice at Northeastern University, as well as the Director of Africana Studies and Professor of Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies. It is my pleasure to be one of the co-facilitators of the Feminisms Unbound series, which really has been one of the groundbreaking flagships of the GCWS. And so it really is my pleasure to be one of the new co-facilitators of this. And I hope that you will attend all of these lectures that happen throughout the year. So welcome to Feminisms Unbound, Feminism and the Ethic of Care. In the past decade, we have seen renewed energy infused into the concept of care in feminist theorizing, writing, teaching, and organizing. How might we articulate a feminist ethic of care, and why does it matter? What does care look like in visual culture, writing, organizing, and thinking? If indeed, if Black feminist theory in particularly is, quote, emphatically preoccupied with care, unquote, as Jennifer Nash states in Black Feminism Re-imagined, then how does one develop, display, and espouse an ethic of care in relation to feminist work? Why has care come to characterize so much of our work, and what are the stakes of this preoccupation? In the context of 21st century assaults on racialized, sexualized, and gendered bodies, what does turning to care clear space for on the page, in the mind, in the community, and in the world? How does an ethic of care issue a challenge to models of consumption, accumulation, or production? What does it mean, look like, or feel like to place care at the center of feminisms? I'm so excited about this topic for many, many reasons, which I will share as we kind of talk with the panelists later on. But I'm especially excited that we have these 4 particular speakers who range in areas. We have academic, we have activists, we have organizers, we have an artist. And so I'm going to read their bios to you. Now I'm reading their bios to you in alphabetical order, but this is not the order in which they will present. But the great thing about Zoom in this format is that you can see their names as they speak, so I don't need to tell you the order. First, we have Chastity Bowick. Chastity Bowick from the Transgender Emergency Fund. Chastity is an award-winning activist, civil rights leader, and transgender health advocate. She is currently the executive director of the Transgender Emergency Fund of Massachusetts, Incorporated, which is the leading crisis agency for transgender communities in Massachusetts. Chastity was also a founding board member of the Trans Resistance MA. Born and raised in Rochester, New York, Chastity began her own transition early at the age of 18 when she moved to Boston to safely pursue her gender affirmation process. After surviving domestic violence and survival sex work, she proudly obtained a master's certificate in nonprofit human services management from Clark University. Prior to working with the Transgender Emergency Fund, Chastity served as a board member of the Massachusetts Transgender Political Coalition from 2014 to 2018. This is an organization dedicated to ending discrimination based on gender identity and gender expression. She has also led transgender health programming at AIDS Project in Worcester. Many of the support groups and transgender-focused health navigation models that she founded in Worcester were the first of its kind in this city. It is because of this trailblazing work and her commitment to strengthening marginalized communities that Chastity was the 2016 recipient of the Belinda Dunn Award at the 27th Annual Bayard Rustin Community Breakfast. She then went on to become the program coordinator of Transcend, Transgender Care, and Education Needs Diversity. At AIDS Action Committee of Massachusetts, a program dedicated to uplifting transgender communities in Greater Boston through health, navigation, peer support groups, and social events. Next, we have Jija Azaglu of the Reckonings Project in Northeastern University. Jija is a Ga-Ewe folklore performing artist who is paused and moved by Octavia Butler's question, what do we need to do now to create the future we want? She often echoes the words of Toni Morrison's and her father's as prayers, as a guide to reach back into the past and lead us toward the present. Jija uses the tool of storytelling, community archiving, and collaging sound as a portal to transcend through time and space. Jija organizes community art events and facilitates workshops around empowerment and strengthening the voice. She intentionally calls for community to reach into the lessons of yesterday while honoring proverbs, poems, and prayers that challenge and lift us up. Jija is the founder of the Black Cotton Club and partners with Grub Street, ICA Boston, and Boston Public Schools to teach creative empowerment workshops in Boston. Jija is also a candidate for a Master's Theological Studies degree at Boston University and holds the role of community archivist at Northeastern University. She is currently working on a listening and public art project entitled Wilderness with Crystal Dye. Michelle Greer from Girls for Gender Equity. Michelle oversees core programming and campaigns, policy and organizing work. In collaboration with the GGE team, Girls for Gender Equity, and key stakeholders, she leads Girls for Gender Equity's strategic priorities to ensure the support and empowerment of young people while being an ambassador for GGE's mission to external, local, and national groups. Michelle is a Black feminist and social worker from Brooklyn. She has over 15 years of experience facilitating conversations about race and oppression, cultivating youth programming, and providing mental health support services to children and their families. Michelle holds an MSSW from Columbia University and a BS from Wesleyan University. She sits on the advisory board of the 13 Educational Services Advisory Committee and is a member of Coro Leadership New York, cohort 31. Michelle enjoys a good bookstore and searching for the best pizza spots throughout New York City, which I'm sure keeps you very busy in light of the good pizza up there. And last but not least, we have Dr. Treva Lindsay from Ohio State University's Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies program. Department, correct. Treva Lindsay is a professor of women, gender, and sexuality studies at The Ohio State University and co-founder of the Black Feminist Night School at Zora's House. Her research and teaching interests include African-American women's history, Black popular culture and expressive culture, Black feminisms, hip-hop studies, critical race and gender theory, and sexual politics. Her most recent book, America Goddamn, if you don't have it, run, don't walk to get it, Violence, Black Women in the Struggle for Justice, published by University of California Press, was described as required reading for all Americans and received a starred Kirkus review. Her first book, Colored No More, Reinventing Black Womanhood in Washington, D.C., was a Choice 2017 Outstanding Academic Title. She is published in the Journal of Pan-African Studies, Souls, African and Black Diaspora, the Journal of African American Studies, African American Review, the Journal of African American History, Meridians, Feminism, Race, Transnationalism, Urban Education, The Black Scholar, Feminist Studies, and Signs. She was the 2020-21 ACLS Mellon Scholars and Society Fellow. She was the inaugural Equity for Women and Girls of Color Fellow at Harvard University in 2016. And she also writes for many public outlets such as Time, CNN, Al Jazeera, NBC, BET, Teen Vogue, The Washington Post, Women's Media Center, Zora, The Griot, and Cosmopolitan. So thank you. I love actually reading the bios because it always feels like an indulgent moment for me. Like I'm like, oh, all these amazing people. I'm going to invite all of our panelists to turn on their cameras, and we are going to begin. Thank you so much to all of you for being here. We are going to begin with Dr. Treva Lindsay. Don't forget to unmute yourself. There you go.
Thank you so much, Regine, for that wonderful introduction. And thank you all for being here this evening. I'm looking forward to this conversation and to just engaging all of these amazing panelists, all of whose work really means a lot to me in terms of thinking through what feminism means for me in this moment, the future of feminism, the future of feminist activism, and how we do all of this work with a robust and capacious ethic of care. And so I want to start with my book, and I'm going to read just a little bit from it, which actually speaks to an ethical framework that speaks to some of the questions that were raised here. The obvious thing I think for most people for the naming of my book is that my book is a nod to Nina Simone's Mississippi Goddamn, that America Goddamn was a way to think about how we talk about violence against Black women, girls, and gender expansive people in the United States. And the fact that one of the primary motivations for Nina Simone to write what is known as her first protest song is actually the murder of the 4 little girls in Alabama at the 16th Street Baptist Church, Carol, Denise, Cynthia, and Addie. And I was struck by the ways that we very often do not say their names. We do not name them. And so linking that to our current movements of say her name, to articulate, to know their stories, and to ethically approach their stories, what does it mean to understand those 4 little girls, Carol, Denise, Cynthia, and Addie, in a life-affirming way? How do we talk about such rampant violence, violation, harm, undoing in ways that affirm the lives that these people lived prior to this moment of being killed in the case of these 4 little girls, or prior to the moment of even non-fatal but similarly injurious and brutalizing encounters. And so I didn't want a book that used these women and girls and gender expansive people as merely objects. of study to illustrate a point, but rather to tell their stories in ways to find details about these women, girls, and gender expansive people that told us who they were in this life. Who was it that these loved ones were missing? That they became living and breathing people that we don't just encounter in the worst moment, in these spectacular moments of encounter and coverage, but rather fully actualized people who are missed, who are longed for, who are being fought for and struggled for by those who love them and those with whom they were in community. So I'm going to read a little bit about how I attempted to do this in the book. The stakes. America Goddamn is in an intergenerational dialogue with the Lady in Brown's opening poetic verse in Ntozake Shange's choreo poem for colored girls who have considered suicide when the rainbow is enough. Shange wrote about the maddening screams and the soft strains of death. What Shange identifies are screams unheard, unfelt, and unseen. She delineates the necessity of a multi-sensory response to these soft strains of death. Black women and girls need to be heard, seen, and held. In the choreo poem, Shange also calls for someone to sing a Black girl song and to let her be born and handled warmly. To be handled warmly is oppositional to the handling that occurs under the conditions of anti-Blackness, misogynoir, and multiple jeopardy. The Black feminist ethical framework of America Goddamn evolves out of the desire to comprehend and contextualize the soft strains of death and to handle Black people warmly through examining both still evolving archives of violence against Black women and girls and our resistance. Handling this topic warmly also means attempting to remember the living, breathing joys of those assailed by the violence I discuss. It is imperative to me as a Black feminist to attempt to talk about all victims in life-affirming ways that do not reduce them to violent and sometimes death-dealing encounters. I take up this difficult subject as a Black feminist historian, which for me entails a robust ethical framework for engaging with an ever-expanding archive. What I knew as a historian of Black women and as a survivor of numerous acts of violence was that there is a heart-rending story to tell. Telling this story demanded a willingness to engage in excruciating past and compelled me to look into my own life and lay bare some of my own truths as a Black woman. This book includes stories best told through the archival and the personal. It's one thing to write about Black women and girls. It's quite another to write from among us. I bear witness and witness to what's on these pages. As my fellow Black feminist scholar, Alexis Pauline Gums reminded me as I finished writing this book, this is sacred work. And with this work, I wanted to expand this concept of witness, which became my way of thinking through the ethical framework of being someone who is consistently and almost on a daily basis thinking about engaging and discussing violence and harm against Black women and girls. I'm often talking about our worst moments, which also made me have to come to grips with my own worst moments in my experiences at the intersection of anti-Blackness, misogynoir, and multiple jeopardy. And so that witnessing that I'm attempting to hold here is a practice that I see mirrored in Darnella Frazier, who at the time was a 17-year-old Black girl who bore witness and witness to the murder of George Floyd, and her insistence on documenting and recording, but it still sits with her in her spirit. She wakes up in the middle of the night thinking about if she had done more and what it means to rest with that burden and to move with that. It meant for me adding an epilogue to my book after it went into production, which ended up being a love letter to Ma'Khia Bryant, who was a Black girl, 16-year-old Black girl who was killed here in Columbus on the same day that Derek Chauvin was convicted of killing George Floyd. And what it meant to hold myself accountable, not only to the community that I live in, but to the Black girls and women that I claim to fight for, that I claim to write from among, that I'm not writing about, but to write from among, this sense of witness. So it meant getting her family's not just approval, but understanding who she was before this moment, so that I could talk to folks and bring up in the book that she loved laying down her baby hairs, that she loved making TikTok videos, that she was a huge hip hop fan, and that she was such a joyous and loving big sister to Janiyah. And I think that that was important in terms of understanding who she was versus an illustrative example of the ways Black girls' lives are snuffed out. And so I wanted to talk about her death, but most importantly, I wanted to talk about her life. So the intentional practice of the book is one of saying, here are these life-affirming details, here are these ways that we can know and understand these girls, women, and gender expansive people. In the book, I also use their first names. I use their first names to build a sense of intimacy, to remind myself of what it means to not be seen as criminalized or simply as the victim of this particular situation, but rather giving a comprehensive look at who these individuals are, who they were to their communities, finding out what their favorite songs were, what their favorite activities were, what their favorite food was. It meant doing a different kind of archival research. A historian could just go to the archive and see the death and contextualize that. But as a queer Black feminist historian, that to me meant, how do I approach such a death-dealing subject with the life affirming imperative? And that for me is what it meant to reside in that space of witness in this. So it meant doing the archive. It meant bringing my own stories of violence to the fore and stories that were in proximity to me to talk about this, to not lie about the stakes of this book for me. The stakes are so very high. When I first started researching this book, a Black woman or girl was being killed every 19 hours. By the time it went into copy edits, it was one every 17 hours. By the time I began my book tour for this book, and to put this into context, this is about a 2.5-year span, it's an average of 4 Black women and girls a day. And so the stakes for me of telling this story, also talking about the resistance and the struggle for justice that Black women and girls and gender expansive people are leading, with that long list of organizations, the encouragement to support and join these organizations doing that work, the call to action that comes with that is also part of that ethical framework. It's not just a documentation, it is a plea, it is a directive, it is an invitation to collaborate with us on world making, on freedom making, on imagining worlds that do not yet exist, right? To abolish the worlds that we know that are so harmful and degrading and just death dealing for Black women and girls, and to imagine other worlds at which our lives are at the center. And so for me, the ethical impulse of this book is rooted in the stakes of it and rooted in the attempts to understand who these girls and women were before these encounters and after these encounters. What is the afterlife of these encounters, and what must we carry forward in terms of bearing witness and witness to their lives? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Treva. I'm going to invite Michelle Greer to go next.
Treva, thank you for that so much. I'm just over here snapping and writing a lot of notes and taking it all in. I think when I was asked and proposed on this question, the first thing that came to mind was a moment in undergraduate school when I just did a deep dive into Sisters of the Yam, and the way in which that impacted me and how I wanted to be in relationship to people in my family and into healing intergenerationally in my family. And I bought the book for everyone, and I was like, we're all gonna read it. We're all gonna have a book club, and we're all gonna like get there together. And I think, you know, it takes different things for folks to come along on the journey of care in the way that maybe folks need it in space, right? And so care looks different for everyone that's involved, and how do you have those conversations? So I think as we at GGE, we use Black feminist thought as our model for how we want to engage the world. We think of it as automatically being engaging in a culture of care, recognizing those that are furthest off the margins. I think Treva just really highlighted the levels of realities that Black girls are facing on a day-to-day basis, and the level of violence, so that when you are creating worlds that address their needs, do address gender expansive young people, address LGBTQA Black folks, immigrants who are coming in from a Black experience, that then you can create worlds that hold and begin to have a conversation about a whole versus the individual. And so at our organization, we work alongside young people. We definitely think that we're having that intergenerational conversation to be able to organize and imagine the worlds that can hold young people past survival, right? A lot of folks are like, these services will get them through. We want young folks to be able to be heavily a part of creating the policy and being in the room so that they can articulate what it is that they need. And then a big part of that we've seen is that we also have to acknowledge what it is that we're all holding so we can take care of one another in those moments. So I have some slides I'm going to share because I think the young people's work speaks for itself. And then I'll go into what we've been working on a little bit in more details. Just give me a second to work on the tech and get this going for y'all. Great. So this is the model that I was talking about for our organization. We have 3 pillars. Our policy change work, which young people are definitely involved in, our youth-centered programming. So we have young people who are coming in. We understand it's a process to get you to the point where you can be able to engage in policy making and sitting at tables with folks at the city, state, and federal level. So a lot of young people come in, bring their authentic selves to the table, and we engage in some popular and political education on what that can look like. And then also in terms of culture change, it's what is the language that we should be using at this time to identify what it is that you're experiencing. How do we share in that language? How do we understand where things haven't felt that right? And how do we get other folks to also engage in that language? So whether that's the media and press, whether that's funders who maybe are still identifying things as girls' issues, but us wanting to really identify specifically who we're saying when we're talking about the work that we're doing, and being able to really tell the story, have young people informing their story on this national platform and level. So I like the ways in which there was some conversation around consent when we're storytelling. We do a lot of consent building with young people, and they start to create the tools to be able to tell these stories themselves within our space. So we believe that Black girls and gender expansive youth deserve to feel safe, and they deserve bodily autonomy and the opportunity for self-determination, and they deserve joy. So in this, we do a lot of work when it comes to the intersection of racism and gender-based violence. And we know that if we are not making space for joy, if we are not making space for us to put down our trauma, then it is very hard to then envision and not be reactive to the things that are having us have to deal with a lot of oppressive situations. So in that space, we hold space for joy and activities. So what you'll see is this is our research that we've done with young people in our campaigns. We participate in participatory action research where young people learn to become the researchers. They go into community, they directly are doing the surveys, they directly are interviewing their friends, teachers, and then they're actually taking that information and also bringing it back. They're writing the reports as well as collecting on the data and then making campaigns out of that. So we started off, we have been around for over 20 years. We started off with a campaign that was very focused on street harassment and what young girls were experiencing when they were walking around in their neighborhoods. And then in response to the lack of support that they were getting, they cultivated campaigns within their community and then nationally. So you'll see in the middle, we have our Why We Can't Wait campaign, which was really in response to My Brother's Keeper under the Obama initiative, to be able to talk about like girls are missing from this conversation. Gender expansive young people are missing from this conversation. And if we're going to talk about caring for others, you cannot erase us. So I think, again, thinking about the erasure that happens through white supremacist practices, what we're doing is amplifying that we're here and we see you and that we're going to value your story. I'm going to show the video. So in terms of our care work, we love working on media. These are all content that young people have created with us to be able to tell their story. You'll see we have, hey, that's not okay. This is their a presentation on what does it mean to address sexual harassment and be safe at schools. You can find this online, but there are little chat books that can be given out and very real-time responses to how do you just have a safer environment when you're in school. They've also talked about what does it mean to have like good and fun and consensual comprehensive sex ed, and how do they begin to have those conversations and giving feedback to sexuality educators and policymakers on what works and what doesn't. And then during the height of COVID, what we learned from our young people, especially those who are survivors, was that they wanted to have space for their thriving and they wanted to be able to talk about that. So they created content around how do we thrive in this moment when we know we're dealing with grief, when we know that we're dealing with relational issues because now we're all locked inside, and how do we also bring adults into that space so that they can also be a part of this. So in this moment, they were able to create affirmation decks, and they also held huge national joy as resistance moments. You can get these affirmation decks on our website. They're really good. And all of the quotes and information were created by young people. And then we have an artist in our organization who made these, right? And so them working together to be like, this is what we're feeling. This is how we're responding. They researched content on like, how do you actually create space in your home when you're with other people to feel safer, to get time for yourself, to set boundaries. In your organizing space, how do you name like, hey, I got to take a break, like I need somebody else to come in here. And so what I think we're really seeing from younger folk is being able to set boundaries that may have looked different. When I started organizing, it was like go, go, go until you can't sleep up all night. And there is a moment for that. And then also, how do I say like, I can't hold all of this. I need someone else to step in, and or it's okay that we are all collectively taking a break. And those were things that were brought from young people, but also brought from our younger organizers that live on our team. I'm just going to show a few more examples and I'll pause. We brought in, what I love is that the integration of art and media. And so this is, and also thinking through the fact when I started talking about Sisters in EM, that Black women, feminists have always had a culture of care. It's always been ingrained. If you think about coming together at the kitchen table, coming together in community, the auntie, the siblings that hold the young children that maybe don't have other folks in that space. And so we take a lot of those rituals and that understanding and bring them back to the group. Trauma disconnects folk. And so we're trying to get young people to feel connected and also know that they're not alone in their story. A lot of times they'll come and be like, you too? I didn't know that that was something that other folks that were in my neighborhood, in my community, were having that experience. And so the collages that you see here is a part of work that we did with a PhD candidate who's working on connecting Black girlhood to the Caribbean and to carnival and to body empowerment and being back in your body and understanding what it means to be sexy and what it means to be proud of your body as a young person, as you're starting to go through multiple changes, as you might have different, you might start to identify differently, as you might start to have more people commenting on your body for you to be able, to articulate what that is. And so I think that this is one of the places when we're talking about healing justice and naming that, yes, we are doing the organizing work, but we also have to pause to also remain in a good sense of who we are and start to have tactics so that we can fortify for this long haul. You know, it's going to be a long haul over the next few years as we're combating different things in the government. And so as we're working to build up organizers, we want them to also be able to have the space to articulate who they are, and art tools, being able to name it in group, being able to have support groups. So this is some of their artwork that came out of that. I'm just going to click through, and then the final thing is that they held their own, the vibe check, that's their own collective space that they created in order to have healing circles. And so in this space was during the time, again, towards the height of COVID. We've continued these after, where young people ask for specific topics, ask for specific information to get back about how they could do things in their community, and then also different things that they wanted to try. So it could be yoga. It was like, we don't know what that looks like. So can you bring in someone who knows how to do yoga with us that feels comfortable? It was making affirmation jars. We've seen this thing on TikTok, or we've seen this thing in space, but we don't know what this looks like, what this feels like. And just space for joy. I love these pictures because it's just space for joy, and making time for that, and making sure that that is rooted in the programmatic space, and that they understand that this is also connected to visioning and planning that through their acts of resistance. I'm gonna stop sharing, and I'll just close with, we do a lot of stuff. I hope to talk a little bit more about all the different ways in which we work, but I really wanted to amplify the ways in which I think there's a lot of news about young people and mental health and the media. And as a former school social worker, I think there are a lot of ways in which mental health can be weaponized. I think it can be another way of policing young people. And what we're seeing from them in this moment in our programming that isn't within some of those traditional institutions is a way in which they are accessing healing and informing that process. And so what I would love to see in this moment of thinking about what does this mean for care, that we're actually turning to young people, seeing the things that they are, that they have identified, and things that we know that work, that are culturally relevant, as well as maybe a little bit more disconnected from the medical model and the over identifying folks under, over pathologizing them under mental health systems. Thank y'all.
Thank you so much, Michelle. It's like you all are killing me because I have to like fight back. I have all these questions and comments like that I have to hold back. Okay. Next we have Jija Azaglu.
I love the way you say my name. Thank you both, to Treva and Michelle, for your offerings. That was really beautiful. And I would love to disrupt a little bit by asking us all in our rooms, wherever you are, to get very comfortable in your seat or lying down or standing, however you choose to feel comfort in your body in this moment. I'm going to disturb the vibe a little bit by asking us to just breathe and be in our bodies as we are exploring what care looks like for our bodies and our minds, for our future, for our past, and also for our present. I want to disrupt just the need to think about beyond this moment and just think about right now in your bodies. I invite you rather to close your eyes if you feel comfortable. I ask that you breathe in through your nose, release through your mouth. Very slow. Breathe in through your nose. Breathe out through your mouth. One more time. Breathe in through your nose. Release through your mouth. I ask that you just take a moment to listen, whether it be to the sound of my voice or people yelling outside or cars going by or children laughing in the next room. Just listen. The invitation here is that you practice being. Your only responsibility in this moment is just to be. Listen. I invite you to hum with me. This requires no talent, no warm up, or no skill. I ask that you just hum and you keep humming with your ears open, with no concern if your tone is right. There is no right or wrong. Just hum. And I ask that you listen to the words, the offering that I bring into the space. Keep humming. At the beginning of Baby Suge's sermon, she told them that the only grace that they can have is the grace that they can imagine. I welcome you into the space of wandering, to imagine the grace that you want or need. She tells them that if they could not imagine it, if they could not see it, they would not have it. So the challenge is to see it, to imagine it, so that you can have it. I invite you to listen to the sermon at the clearing. Here, she said, in this here flesh, in this here place, we flesh that weeps, laughs, flesh that dances on bare feet in grass. Love it hard. Yonder, they do not love your flesh, they despise it. They don't love your eyes, they just as soon pick them out. No more do they love the skin on your back. Yonder, they flay it. And oh, my people, they do not love your hands. Those they only use, tie, bind, chop off, and leave empty. Love your hands, love them. Raise them up and kiss them. Touch others with them. Pat them together. Stroke them on your face, because they don't love that either. You got to love it, you. And no, they ain't in love with your mouth. Yonder, out there, they will see it broken and break it again. What you say out of it, they will not heed. What you scream from it, they do not hear. What you put into it to nourish your body, they will snatch away and give you leavens instead. No, they don't love your mouth. You got to love it. This is flesh I'm talking about here. Flesh that needs to be loved. Feet that need to rest and to dance. Backs that need support, shoulders that need arms, strong arms. I'm telling you, you got to love it. 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 And love it, and love it hard. Love this flesh. Love this flesh and love it. Take a deep breath in through your nose. Release through your mouth. Take a deep breath in through your nose. Release through your mouth. I invite you to come back to the sound of my voice when you are ready. May you receive this meditative essay as an invitation to be, a moment to listen to your body and know its language, its movement. I invite you to wonder what it means to imagine this flesh basking in the mist of grace, not in the future, not in the past, but right now. I invite you to welcome acts of the trickster to disturb the rhythm of doing and lean into the being. Disturbance for the bodies that are constantly looked at as a disturbance in other worlds is the request to rest, to lay down, to what Trisha Hersey points to as our call to rest. Now, the trickster is normally the one disturbing worlds, accepting and giving tests, and most importantly, convincing themselves that they are forced in narratives. It is time for the trickster to be tricked into rest, to be told that their bodies, their flesh is to be cared for through being, through resting, through imagining, through doing nothing, not even for themselves, if that means moving. I'm reminded of Bell Hooks' reminder, when the earth is sacred to us, our bodies can also be sacred to us. In what ways do we need to connect with earth? I'm reminded of Saida Hartman's comment on care is the antidote to violence. In what ways do we need to care for our bodies? How can we build a praxis of the trickster, imagining worlds and graced lived, resting? May we find the beauty in the knowing and unknowing, learning and unlearning, earthing and unearthing, the being and not doing. And I would like to end this meditation with the beginning of Baby Shook's sermon, inviting us to participate in a moving exercise. It's not over. So in this moment, in your rooms, no matter how silly it may look or feel, I ask or I invite you to participate. She gathers the mothers, the fathers, the children, and asks them, let this space hear you laugh. So in this very moment, let this space, wherever you are, hear you laugh. Can I see your laughter? Can I hear a laughter? You don't have to put your voices on, but just laugh. Just laugh. Let this space hear you laugh. Yes. Let this space see you dance. Move. Oh, yeah. Yes. Yes. Let this space hear you yell. Yes, sorry to the people who have on headphones. Let this space hear you hum. Let the space hear you laugh. Let the space hear you laugh and laugh louder and laugh louder and laugh louder and laugh louder. Let the space see you dance and move, dance and move. And dance and move and move. Here, in this here place, we flesh that weeps, laughs, flesh that dances on bare feet in grass. Love it hard. It must be loved and loved and loved and loved and loved and loved and loved. Thank you. May this invitation ring echoes in your ears. In many ways, I think the trickster invitation is for all of us to trick ourselves into resting, into caring for our bodies in ways that's not doing for others at moments. I know we all have the responsibility of being mothers and fathers and teachers and all of these things to other people. And I think a huge responsibility is to care for ourselves in this very moment, and whatever that may look like, in the practice of rest, in the practice of dancing, in the practice of loving, in the practice of laughing, in the practice of yelling, in the practice of humming. Thank you so much.
Ooh. Why, G-Job? Thank you so much. All right, Chastity.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Dezora, for that. You really just loosened me up. My work can be very uptight and grueling, and I feel such a relief. So thank you. And thank you to Treva and Michelle for your remarks as well. Amazing. I feel so honored to be such amongst amazing, powerful women. So for me, thinking about the conversation for tonight, it took me back to the beginning of starting this work that I do. As a recipient of the Transgender Emergency Fund in 2012, only services that they were providing at the time was emergency assistance or try to put you in a room for a few months. And that was if the funds were available. So all services are contingent upon the availability of funds. And so when I became the volunteer executive director in 2015, one thing that kept coming back to me was, how can I care more for my community? The things that I keep getting slammed in my face with was, trans women, they have the highest HIV rates and they all do sex work and all these different things. But at the same time, there was no resources provided to assist in these matters. And so, started building our program to be able to offer more than just this emergency assistance, to be able to offer more substantial housing, personal supplies, nutrition, and then assistance with social services, because going down, believe it or not, going to change your gender marker at the Registry of Motor Vehicles, or going to try to get the Department of Transitional Housing assistance can be grueling because you're being misgendered. The people in the waiting room are whispering about you, pointing, and there's no accountability being held for anyone. And so then you turn to the streets, because who wants to deal with that transphobia, discrimination, racism, all combined in one? And so we started escorting members to some of these services to get them the things that they need, but it still wasn't enough. So now we're offering these additional services, but yet trans women of color are still dying at a high rate. Trans women of color in Boston are still being attacked and raped, and it's going unreported because we are a population that is underserved. So that started having me thinking is, how can I save lives and still provide these services? So looking at the statistics of trans women of color being murdered, we are mainly murdered by Black men. And so I was grappling with this idea, like, am I truly a part of the Black community? We get a lot of hate from cisgender Black women who feel like we're invading their space, we're trying to take their men, we're trying to turn them gay. And so I felt like, okay, I can't have a conversation about this with cis women because I don't think they will fully understand where we're coming from. And so I partnered with my friend 3 years ago. His name is Martin Henson, the executive director of the B Men Foundation, the Black Men's Foundation, where they uplift and bring Black men together to talk about various topics and how can we uplift Black men amongst each other. And so we started having this conversation about how can we stop Black men from murdering trans women of color? And so we came up with this idea to have a dinner and discussion with straight Black men and Black trans women. And we thought, obviously the pros and cons of this type of event. Do we need security? Like, is this going to be somebody who was dealing with somebody? A lot of guys in the Black and Latin communities, when they want to deal with a transgender woman of color or any trans woman, they consider themselves to be on the down low. They don't want anyone to know about it. Hence where attacks and murders come from. So we decided to have our first one. My task was to obviously gather trans women of color, and he gathered a bunch of straight Black men, and we had our first one. And when I tell you, this conversation was eye-opening, it was riveting, it was educational. And this sparked me to be like, okay, what we're doing at Trans Emergency Fund is one thing, but it's other things we need to do around this country to start this conversation. And this is it. And some of the things that we were hearing out of this conversation was some of the things I already knew. Like, one guy saying like, oh, well, my baby mother told me if I look at a trans woman, I'm gay, and my mother raised me, don't look at a he, she, and that's nasty. And so we start breaking down some of these stigmas and things that they were taught as a child and growing up, and men who are going to be raising young boys to become men, and just understanding that I am another Black human being. Just put my gender to aside. Just see me as another Black human. When you think about what's going on in society, especially over these past 5 years, where this country is going, we feel that we need our communities to come together. It shouldn't be sub-communities underneath the Black community that are fighting against each other. So when I think about care, this brings me back to this situation. This is care. This is how we care for our different community members. This is how we care for ourselves, because I love my life. But the United States is telling me that I should be lucky to be alive right now because I'm over 35, and the life expectancy for trans women of color is between 31 and 35. So I'm hoping by breaking down some of these systemic oppressions and barriers, by having these conversations, we can literally save lives. But out of this conversation came another series that we need to have. Where are these men getting these ideals, and where are they getting these notions from? It's the Black women and their families who've raised them, the Black women who they are in relationship with, sisters, cousins, aunties. So it is time now that the next conversation will be with trans women and cisgender women of color, and how can we see each other as just women? How can we see each other as community? And then we can break down some of these systemic oppressions that has been placed on all of us as Black people. And so for me, care is not just about housing and employment. Care is about community. Care is about culture. Care is about education and understanding where you come from and how you got here today, and the things we need to do in order for our community to survive. Because like I like to say at all of our Bridging the Gap sessions, we have so many different communities and structures that are being oppressions placed upon the Black communities. Why would we do it to each other? And I know I can't save the world, but I think that these conversations can spark something to where we can start having conversations with our men who, quote unquote, are on the street or in the barbershops, and having these conversations, because not only are they killing us, they're killing each other as well. And so I hope to extend my work beyond the Transgender Emergency Fund. That is just one part of me, but I was Black before I was trans. And so when I think about care, I have to think about the underserved communities, the people who are not seen. And I no longer refuse to be silent. I want to be seen. I want to be heard. And like Dr. Treva said, I want to be held. I want somebody to take me into consideration when it comes to care and the things that I need as a person and as a Black person. And so I hope that you will continue to watch my journey. I am happy to say that I am leaving the Transgender Emergency Fund to embark on this journey under Chastity's Consulting, where I will be going across the country, myself and Martin, and having these different conversations, bridging the gap dinners in the cities that we needed the most. So we'll be in Atlanta, we'll be in Houston, we'll be in the Carolinas. Dr. Treva, I'm coming to Ohio next month. I'll be in Ohio. We need to start having these conversations across the country. And with this, I hope to save more lives. And I hope to be around much longer to be able to do so. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Chastity. Thank you, Jija. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Treva. So for anyone who's new to these conversations, the way that this works is it is really a conversation. So rather than me as the moderator asking questions to each of our panelists, we invite the panelists to ask questions of one another. So I will just give them some time. And then anyone who wants to start can just unmute themselves and ask their question. Thank you.
I'll go first. Thank you all to this beautiful panel for presenting your gifts in the ways that you have. Michelle, I really love the program with the young women, and I'm wondering, and this is a question for all of us really, but particularly to you as you're working with them directly, what are some of the youth showing you about your inner child? I think our inner child sometimes are often neglected and placed to the side. So I'm just like really interested, because a lot of people have been spewing this like inner child language and ways to connect with our inner child self as a form of care. Anywho, the question stands.
In general, I like love play games. I love like acting things out and being goofy. So I think now that I'm more, executive level now, so I'm less in the programs. When I get to be in them, it's like, oh, you're missing this. Because when you're running programs, you're doing it like weekly all the time. And so I think making time for that, making time for connection and that youthfulness. And what happened for me when I was younger is I was definitely on my own a lot, definitely had a lot of responsibility. And so left play pretty early on, like in my teenage years. And so got it through some other means, but like, what does that mean to really just like, and I sort of like keep my goofy precious. So what does it mean to be goofy with others? What does it mean to let out like my laughter and my silliness in public space versus like that only preserved for those people I trust? And I think that there's a level of vulnerability that young people give you when they don't know something and they're curious, when they want to just have fun, or when they're asking you questions about yourself, like, how did you end up like this, or that sort of thing. So that's what I really appreciate. And I think they're not questions that we get asked every day unless you're around younger folk. Thanks for that question.
Yeah, I'll kind of respond to that. And then I have a question I'd love to pose to my fellow panelists. I think about this a lot because so many of the people I write about in the books are girls when violence or violation happens. And so the work to get back to, and I like to think of it as the play to get back to and to recover the inner child or the child that didn't yet get to exist, can be so important in terms of our restorative and transformative processes in moving forward. That so often when those traumas occur so early, or we're told we're too grown, we're fast-heeled girls, we are mature for our age, be all in grown folks' business. There's so many ways that the processes of adultification that happen around Black girls in particular, and Black gender expansive youth, are so limiting to that. And I feel like that inner child, the conversations around that are so important right now, that finding that, or even discovering it for the first time, of what it means to actually exist in this space of exuberance and joy, is so important for thinking through what it means for me to continuously identify for a Black girl for the rest of my life. So when I say I ride and live for Black girls, right, I'm a ride and live type of chick for Black girls, what I mean is I'm riding for all that comes with that, all that moves with that, all the Kierkegaard calls it kinetic orality, the way we move through the world, how we use our bodies to enter space, our loudness, our creativity, our deliberate insistence on being seen, is something that I think is part of that inner child, and something that is so important, I think, in doing this work that is recuperative and transformative in terms of doing that. And so I think when I'm doing this work, part of writing this book was me finding that there was a lot of inner child I had never actually lived in and lived through. And it's been so affirming to find ways to do that. And mine is dance, usually, where I find that silliness, that goofiness, that awkwardness, that all those questions and things that you're unbound to having an answer to, because you're in that exploratory space of childhood. Also wanted to pose a question to Chastity, if possible, in thinking about these conversations, particularly with cis and trans Black women, because I'm sitting here and I'm like, yes, 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 please, 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 in thinking about this and the ways that I'm thinking about these questions. One of my favorite pieces I ever got to write was with Elle Moxley about what it meant to have solidarity among Black women and Black gender expansive people, and the struggles that were real. Like, even the statistics that I use are trans antagonistic in that they don't include the deaths often. I had to kind of figure that out on my own, and then use that to kind of do new data points, or how we talk about maternal morbidity, but don't talk about all people with gestational capacity, or the ways that even coverage of these misgenders people. And so finding out the true number of people who are doing that, while still being life affirming in my approach to trans women. I hated regurgitating these statistics that were consistently about violence and harm and this, without having these kind of life affirming ways to speak about my sisters. And so at the basis of the conversation, I'm curious, what is something that you think is anchoring to that conversation in terms of building that solidarity that is both life affirming and recognizing the marginalizing impulses that cis privilege often affords Black women, but sometimes we are not moving with that kind of knowledge or that awareness or with that solidarity in mind? What would what is that thing that you're anchoring this in those conversations?
Thank you so much for the question. So for me, to be honest, it starts with anger. I use the anger in me that I had from, childhood violence and things of that nature to want to horn in on the purpose of this meeting. And hopefully I'll get to have one in Ohio as well, so you can attend. But the purpose of this that I want to horn on is womanhood, Black womanhood. And what does that mean? And who does that include? And I think that a lot of Black cis women don't see us as women, And so I think some of them need to be in a room with us to hear our stories, to hear what we stand for and the things that we believe on, because they may be the same things that you believe on, but you just didn't know because you were so caught up on what's between her legs. And so I think that we need to put those things aside. And I want to really horn on and anchor on, what if I was your sister? I have a sister, I have a mother. You know, what if I was your relative? Would you still feel the same way about me? And so we have to start looking at people as people, regardless of our gender. So my thing in these meetings, I hope people will take away of an understanding of what womanhood really means, what Black womanhood really means, and what it means when you say that I ride for all Black women, that trans women is included in Black women. And I want to thank you for making that note. When we think about maternal deaths, people don't think about, you know, obviously trans men who still have biological parts that they can have children, and they don't think about that. And I would love to have a further conversation down the line with you, Dr. Treva, about those statistics when it comes to that rate. And I hope that people are taking away a sense of, what can I do after these meetings? What can I do now? Like, this is something that was eye-opening for me. Now, what can I do? Take this back to my community, to my set of friends, and educate them. Because it takes us not only to show up to these dinner discussions, it's what are you doing with this information after we leave here? Was it just something that you enjoyed for 2 hours, or is it something that you're going to take and utilize to help benefit our community? And so we like to follow up with people after these events. You're not just going to come, no, we need your information. We're going to follow up. We keep in contact because we want this to be an educational tool that you can take and use in your own personal communities.
That is so good. I'm like over here getting giddy because I always say connecting people is my superpower. And so I'm already sensing like the collaborations that are going to happen between Treva and Chastity, and feeling very excited about that. Thank you so much to all of you. This was it was such a joy to have this particular constellation of people in conversation about this topic. And I guess you each approached it in such different ways, the question about what an ethic of care is. And so I guess I'm going to ask you one of these kind of maybe annoying questions that I ask my children at the dinner table, where it's like, give me one adjective or give me one sentence or 3 adjectives. So like, if we were to say, you know, what does an ethic of care feel like for each of you? How would you answer that question?
Just a sentence or word?
A sentence or an adjective. I was going to mention, you know, some of those children are referred to as teenagers, so I can wait. A sentence, a word, anything.
I'm just going to say being held.
I would say being understood.
The act of slowing down.
I'm going to say mellifluous.
Thank you so much. Before I open up to the audience and start taking some of those audience questions, Michelle or Chastity, do either of you have questions or comments for the other panelists?
I was going to ask, how are folks caring for themselves right now? I think it's a constant struggle to actually do the self-care work. It's cyclical, right? It does not stop after you get to a certain point. And so I know for myself, it's been looking like Like I'm literally taking days off from work so that I have more time to just do the things that I want to do. So curious how folks are finding space, even if it's like a moment. What is that looking like for y'all?
I'm struggling right with that. I'm struggling with self-care for myself. So number one, being honest about it for me, it's like, okay, I'm struggling with self-care. And I'm trying to get some interesting books that I'm gonna read. So I'm ordering your book now. Trying to find interesting books that are going to enhance my knowledge on things that are interested to me. And my question would be for Dr. Treva, which is, if just to, you know, have a crazy moment here, just say the White House administration came to you and said you had an unlimited amount of financial resources to combat safety for marginalized people, where would you start?
Ooh, okay, that's a question. Wow. Unlimited, no strings were attached, unrestricted from the government, right? I'm like, ooh, that's a good imagine. That's like me hitting the Powerball last night, was hoping that was gonna be me with that billion. You know, one of the things I would say for that immediately, wow. So I'm gonna say what I call what I call comprehensive housing for everyone that is safe, that includes all of not just your needs, but your wants, right? So often we are in survival mode when we think of the things that we want to demand, and we're not demanding the world, and we deserve the world. So what does it mean to have a space where you are safe and safe from harm, and safe in the ways that Black feminists have been detailing what safety means, right? Unmatched by harm, free to imagine, free to create, that it's not wedded to extractive labor, but because you are you, that you are housed in this place, you are clothed in fabulousness, that you are fed, that you are cared for in terms of this house, that having the needs that are met from healthcare, that is sustainable and in relationship to the land, deeply wedding to Indigenous knowledge practices of how we begin to do that. And so I imagine that being a very capacious way immediately. Because one of the things I notice is not just people being unhoused, but what it means to have a home and a space where you have your needs and desires met, right? And having that met in a way that is communal, collaborative, and collective.
Don't forget your self-care, Michelle. You're gonna need some self-care while you're doing that.
My self-care is honestly right now, I was struggling a little bit for the last couple of weeks. I've had more events about the book. So whenever I'm talking about the book, it's a very hard book. And in a lot of ways, because it's deeply personal and it involves violence is at the center of it. But I've been watching Love is Blind, and I'll probably watch The Crown after the first episode of the new series tonight. And really engage that. I just had one of my 10th god baby was born last week, and I am so excited to welcome a new person to this world, and it recommits me to wanting to be a warm place for them to exist in this world. So I have to care for myself in order to be present for them and for generations after us. We're doing ancestor work right now. We will be somebody's ancestors. So the work we do right now, the rest we get right now, the commitment to that we get right now, the play we commit to right now has reverberations for generations. And so I'm trying to be intentional about that.
That gave me chills. Gija, you want to talk about self-care before we go to some of the audience Q&A?
Sure. I'm also on that train with you, Chastity and Trevor. But I have been rereading and rereading the sermon at the clearing, which I didn't know was a form of care, but because I've been reading it so much in preparation for things, I'm like, oh, it's an act of whatever I'm doing. However, it is a form of care. I am paying attention to different things. I'm saying words differently every time I read it. So that has been my way of caring for myself, being able to be familiar with Black women's words, which are always healing and sermons to me in wherever space I am.
Thank you, Jija. It certainly felt caring to me when you read it. And, you know, I'm a Black feminist literary scholar, so I'm very familiar with it. I've read it many times. In fall 2020, when I started teaching again, after, you know, the pause from the pandemic in March 2020, that was the first thing that we read to our students on the first day of class. And it sounded totally different coming from you, and I felt it. Thank you for that gift. I'm also reading Cole Arthur Riley's book, This Here Flesh, which, you know, is, yeah, we'll have to talk about that. Okay. So we have this question from the chat. This question is for Michelle. How can schools and colleges support Girls for Gender Equity campaigns?
Yay. You can go to our website and join our newsletter. We keep folks updated about what we have going on. We are taking a pause right now. You know, we wanted to see how these midterm elections were going, and we knew that this is a marathon, not a sprint. So we've been doing a lot of like rest for ourselves, just being with our young people, and then planning for the next steps. But you'll see our national agenda for Black girls is on the website. And some of our national work is up, but then we also are engaged in the Police Free Schools campaign to bring more care versus officers into school spaces, as well as thinking about, we'll have a few more things coming out with the protection for Black women and girls bill that is right now in the federal government. So just sign on to our newsletters and you'll get more info.
Thank you for that. I love that question. I was on the board of another small nonprofit that serves Black women and girls for many, many years. So those questions are like, I have to say, you can also donate to them. Donate, donate, donate. The next question we have here is for Professor Lindsay. This question is, what do you hope people will get from your book? And how do you think we as a community can focus on the safety for marginalized people?
Wow, thank you for that question. So I end the book, well, the first ending to the book, the Ma'Khia Bryant love letter is the actual ending now, but initially it starts with a quote from prison and police abolitionist Miriam Kaba, that hope is a discipline. And so often Black women and girls and gender expansive people are asked to survive the wholly impossible. So thinking about Nannie Helen Burroughs, you know, what she names her training school for colored girls, the specializing in the wholly impossible. And to me, that is whether that's unlivable living or surviving these, I mean, ridiculous statistics and data about violation and harm. My hope lies in us, right? The discipline of us, in our ancestors and what we've practiced throughout history. We've been practicing freedom in spite of unfreedom for centuries in this nation. We have made love, we have made care, we have made creativity, we have made genius in spite of the conditions of unfreedom. And so my hope is that not only are we working towards a world in which the conditions of unfreedom are shifting, but that we are actively practicing freedom in community with one another as we build the worlds we seek to exist in and burn down the ones that are harming us, that are violating us, that are devouring us. I'm hopeful because I believe in Black girls. When I say I ride and live for us, I believe in our transformative power. And I know elections are but one part of this. I hope today, if you voted, great. Now what's your plan? After that, these various strategies. That's one of the tools we have in our robust and exhaustive arsenal in terms of fighting against unfreedom. And so joining and supporting orgs, joining and supporting artists, creating art, creating voice, being a voice, learning and listening to other voices in collaboration. We've been doing that. And we have delivered in so many ways. We got us, right? You know, there's always this phrase, I say this in the book, that people often say, like, no one cares about Black girls, right? And you hear that, and I remember in an interview I did with Jim DeRogatis, who was the reporter who first reported majorly on the serial sexual predation of R. Kelly. And he mentioned that. And I sat with it because I knew what he was trying to get at, right? I know what that quote means. And it's conveying an urgency, it's conveying an exigency, it's conveying the erasure, the ignoring. But the thing is, I had a corrective, and I was in a conversation with Christina Sharp, amazing author and writer, scholar as well. Black girls care about Black girls. And we ain't nobody. When we care and show up for us, we're asking that more people care and more people get involved and invested. And I'm hopeful because we continue to create, we continue to live, we continue to breathe, we continue to dance, make love, make family, make kinship, and imagine worlds. And we've been unable to be stopped, right? We've been a force. And I believe in that force and its undoing. And that doesn't mean that's necessarily going to be our generation that inherits this new condition of freedom. But it does mean that we're doing the work of building on that. Every generation is called to do that. It is Assata's call. It is our duty to fight for freedom. And so that duty is something that is ingrained within me that I feel wholly committed to while enjoying being in space and community with us as we fight.
That is so good. I remember that essay very well, Treva, and it's something I always say to my students. I'm teaching a Black Feminisms class right now. And, you know, it's as I believe it was actually Michelle that said earlier, this is a tradition, right, of a Black feminist tradition. I mean, when Combahee says that, you know, we have to defend we are here for ourselves, right? We are here in defense of ourselves, and we stand for ourselves and we care for ourselves. And so thank you so much for that. My question before returning to the chat, I'm going to ask a question to Jija, because Jija and I, in addition to being neighbors here in Boston, we work together at Northeastern on a project called the Reckonings Project. And Jija and I, so my students in that Black Feminisms class have a service learning component to the class. And we went over to the Haitian Women's Association, Association Femmes Haitiennes in Boston in Dorchester over the summer, I guess about 2 months ago. And when Jija was introducing herself, she said, you know, I'm an artist and a community organizer who centers care in all care practices. And I loved that so much. And that was when I was like, oh, I need to invite Jija to be on the panel. But Jija, I'm thinking about your work as an artist, your work as an advocate, your work as a community organizer, your work as a co-creator and curator of many things. Can you talk a little bit about, I mean, I think we experienced it tonight in this particular space, but maybe give us another example of what it looks like for you to center care in these different spaces that you navigate, particularly throughout the city of Boston, but also thinking of you as someone who is, you know, a global figure that brings in all of these diasporic traditions as well.
Yeah, thank you for that question. The first thing that came up for me was thinking about how church taught us about our bodies and our voices in ways that I grew up in North Carolina. So I grew up in an African Pentecostal church, and most of the time outside of the church, I think a lot of Africans felt kind of excluded in different communities for whatever reason, mainly because of their experience of coming from from Africa. But even thinking about Black folks, particularly in North Carolina, and having godparents who are pastoring a Baptist church, and how church was a place where they did feel that sense of freedom, whether it was through singing or whether it was through speaking at testimony time, or, you know, all of these things that we're experiencing, ways that they would define liberation or freedom. And those are heavily influenced in the ways that I curate spaces for people to come into the space and feel heard or seen. And the invitation is that they do speak and that they do sing, and practicing how they want to be seen, they defining themselves, the liberation for themselves, them defining who they are for themselves, So speaking, singing, performing, particularly in Black Cotton Club, where the live band is stationed at the beginning of the space, and the mics are passed out amongst the audience, and the audience is invited to speak, to sing, to perform in ways that they want to be seen in other places, but are, have to shuck and jive or feel like they have to pretend to be something that they're not. I forgot your question, Dr. Jean-Charles, so forgive me, but I'm going to go on the right.
No, it's good. It's actually, so it was about how you center practices of care in given an anecdote, right? About a different space. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think I'm really called to calling on the words. I'm calling on a lot of theologies by Black women who I think have spoke in many ways. I think we all have mentioned the inspiration of mothers, of aunties, who have always had this wisdom, and they always spoken to us about their own philosophies, whether it was through braiding your hair or recipes or Bible verses, or even just speaking, sit your butt down somewhere, which is a whole sermon in one line, and I think in many ways, I'm just calling on the things that we already know, the wisdom that's in our own community as a form of guidance and a practice and to care for ourselves.
Thank you, Jija. And I'd invite anyone else to respond to that if you would like to, or respond to what Jija said. Feel free, any of the other panelists. Are you unmuting, Shariva, or am I overreading? Okay. I was like, I think Shariva's gonna say something. Okay, friends. So we have, I'm gonna take 2 more questions from the chat that we have here. The first is from Michelle, to Michelle. Could you please elaborate on the mental health medical model for young Black girls being over pathologizing, and how other models, such as the one that your organization is cultivating, could be a space for decolonizing that medical model?
Yeah. So the medical model is, especially for mental health, is based off the DSM, which is a diagnostic tool that we use in this country. It's different in every other country. And it's a way it's supposed to be a guide that helps you to understand what potentially can be going on for someone. But the way that it's used now is to be able for, like, if you want to get mental health services, you usually have to have a diagnosis in order to do that. And what we see is that oftentimes with certain diagnoses, you have people of color who are being overprescribed for those diagnoses. So in school settings, it's usually that young folks will get a diagnosis of ADHD before they'll get a diagnosis of adjustment disorder, because they're dealing with multiple different things, before their histories and their experiences are acknowledged, before anyone's asking, is school even a safe place for them? And so what our conversation is in the cultivation of these spaces of care and recognition is that we have to do the relational work, and we have to understand where you're coming from in order to even offer you a space where you can begin on your journey to say, I'm struggling with this, I need support with this, and these are potentially some of the tools we can use. What we often see in schools is that something will go really well in a setting, and then it becomes almost like curriculum for mental health. So let's do socio-emotional learning. Let's have yoga in schools without really talking about how are young people supposed to connect to that or feel about it, or if that's actually what's needed. And oftentimes the ways in which studies are done around mental health also they don't see the young person. So there was mention of, young people coming into school, not being adultification, being expected by an early age, by 3rd grade, sometimes younger, to already be able to understand everything, to be able to answer questions quickly, the way that they're seen through racialized and gendered lens within their classrooms, which oftentimes cause conflict, and then have people saying, this is what's wrong with this young person, or not seeing that young person, then automatically putting them into spaces that aren't really teaching them or supporting them. And I know that for me, a part of my care ethic and what I've been querying as a trained social worker and then provider is how do I disconnect my practice from carceral systems? So if a young person comes to me and tells me that something's going on for them, that I'm going to make sure that I'm not calling the police first. I'm not calling a medical, like 24-hour in psychiatric institution first as my means of getting them support. And that I'm making sure that I understand in a lot of ways that I'm being connected to that being an abolitionist has to be a part of the care ethic that I have in my work. And so that means having to find people so you can push that, so you can understand how you do that legally if you're choosing to be an active clinician. And that's a lot of conversation that schools need to be able to have to see if they can hold that. And a lot of folks get scared of that, but there are ways to do that. And there are a lot of folks who are having that conversation. I know Miriam Kaba was mentioned. Shira Hassan has done a lot of that work. And so we need to be able to, I think one of the things that happened when we had the defund movement over the past few years, and this has been going on for so much longer, when it became popular conversation, there wasn't enough understanding of what it means to do something else. And so that means valuing the practices that people have had in their own communities and being able to understand how to provide that at a larger level. And when people say, I don't want this, I want that, being able to hear that and understand how to give us space and time to be able to build those larger models. Everyone else has got to practice. We know that like a lot of these care models in the medical model don't work, but they get to be held up and valued. But then our tools that we maybe don't have all the answers for, it's like, well, that's not going to work. And so we need to stop that practice and be able to say, you know, we're going to try because we have to, because our survival is rooted in that.
Can I just add a little something to that, Michelle? Thank you so much for that. And thank you for thinking about and doing the work you're doing with that abolitionist framing of this. And I consider myself a student of abolition. I'm learning and I'm growing in how you divest from carceral responses to everyday things. And I think we're getting at least a little more language right now around the medical industrial complex and how anti-Blackness operates in it, how misogynoir operates in it, how transphobia operates in these spaces, and ableism operates in this. And it's happening more that we're identifying racism, anti-Blackness in medicine, but that still hasn't extended to mental health in the ways that our mental health system, medical system is incredibly tied to those same racist, anti-Black, transphobic, homophobic, ableist logics that produce really distressing outcomes for us, because we still are referring to people as distressed individuals as opposed to individuals living in distressed environments that we're not actually responding to. And thinking about the number of Black women and girls who've been killed while in distress. So calling police or even medical health professionals when we are trying to respond to an individual responding to distress is something that can be death dealing or and lifelong injury for so many Black women and girls. We can think about that in terms of Deborah Danner, Eleanor Bumpurs, Tanisha Anderson. There are countless examples of how disability and ableism and Blackness intersect and have led to death-dealing outcomes for Black women and girls and gender-expansive people. And so I really want folks to take away from this as you're thinking about and learning about what abolition really means and what we're asking for folks to invest in and divest from are systems that are built on warring against our humanity. I think that matters deeply, and especially when it comes to mental health and even the language we use to talk about individuals who are in distressing environments and in distressing situations, and what that costs for folks who are already criminalized for simply existing. The ease with which we criminalize distress for Black women and girls and gender expansive people is frankly violent. Right? There's no other way to identify that. So an abolitionist approach also talks about this in really in-depth and dynamic ways.
And I think absolutely, you know, Treva, like you, I am very much a student of abolition, and it strikes me throughout this conversation the extent to which even the framing, right, the language of care, like that's something that abolitionists are also leading the way of. And if you think about so many things that have come up tonight when we talk about what is life affirming, how do we imagine otherwise, right? What are the different ways that we can build something as opposed to looking to tear something down? All of those are directives that come from an abolitionist framework. So I appreciate you both of you for really bringing that explicitly into this space. So the final question is the question from the chat, and it's a question to each of the panelists. For answers, I think I'm going to start with Chastity and then go from Chastity to Jija to Michelle and Treva. Okay, so Chastity, Jija, Michelle, and Treva. So the question is this: what is your imagination, another excellent word, or vision for a future at a time when hope is hard, based on your years of work? What is your imagination, or what do you imagine or envision for the future at a time when hope is hard, based on your years of work?
Thank you. So I imagine a future where gender is benign, where nobody has control or the right to tell anyone to do with their body, where people of color, of all colors, are seen equally on this land that we were brought to. A world where, I just imagine a world where people of color are all together. We are thriving, we are building, we are bringing back Black Wall Street. We are, you know, taking claim over the things that are ours. And I see hope for the future of our youth. And this is why I do this work. It's for the youth. It's for the trans children that are coming up behind me who are wondering, am I going to be able to get a job? I'm doing it for our youth. And so I see a future where our youth, they're not going to be having, hopefully they won't have these type of panels, because everything that we've done, all the individual work collectively that we've done, will make it so that they live in a world where everything is just how we see it, how we see fit by doing this work now. So I have hopes for our future.
Thanks, Chastity. Go ahead, Jija.
Yeah, I imagine Black bodies dancing in the middle of the street for no reason. I imagine Black bodies singing, praying in whatever language that they would like to speak in, of worlds that they want to live in. I imagine them having, or living rather, in liberated ways. And it's not in contrast to somebody else's oppression, but it's rather just them living and being. I also imagine Black bodies practicing slowing down and not having to always do, because this world doesn't demand much from them, that this world that they live in is a world in which they can live and be, and it not have to be a fight every single day. And Black bodies just being. That's what I imagine in this world. That's such a beautiful question, by the way. So thank you to whoever asked.
Amen. Thank you for that. Michelle?
I had this moment where when I originally heard that Bezos was trying to like go into space and do all this stuff. And in my brain, I was like, oh, that's cool, because then you can be up there, but we can take back the Earth. And so like that was a moment for me to imagine in real time something that I was like, yes, like what if it was like all the billionaires are up there doing whatever they want, but we are back here indigenously living, being able to like figure it out and really claim the space that we were already inheriting. So I think there's something there about just being able to be with land, have land, have space, and also lifting up what folks have said. I do think then an ideal would be to have it be so like, I don't want to have to like say racism and have that be like a question mark for people. Like it exists. And so if we could get to a place where they're just like, yes, this exists, and that can just be truth, that would be beautiful.
Ooh, this is one of the toughest questions I think I've had, which tells me something even about the ways that my imagination has been limited by the worlds that we inhabit. But I will say, I imagine a world that's guided in love, and there's no love without justice. There's no love without peace. There's no love without our needs being met. There's no love without creativity. There's no love without a relationship to the land. There's no love without being able to enter the world as fully and as dynamic as we are. And I imagine a world where we've created multiple worlds for people to thrive in on their terms, that we don't live in extractive relationships with one another or the land, but rather ones that are built in growth and encouragement and support and love and justness. And I believe in us. I believe in us more than I believe in the war against us.
Thank you all so much, so much, so much. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. I personally am really grateful for each of you and for the work that you bring in the world and the way that you not only can talk about this as you did tonight, but how you are living out an ethic of care, a Black feminist ethic of care in how you move and breathe in the earth and in the work that you do. And so by way of conclusion, I actually want to just read a little bit. I want to take this quotation from Dr. Farah Jasmine Griffin's Read Until You Understand. And in it, she writes about Toni Morrison's The Bluest Eye. And she describes the bluest eye and the various traumas that Pecola goes through. And she says, it is this trauma of dispossession that contributes to the stripping of the child's self, which makes her completely vulnerable to others, undesired and unloved. However, throughout her literary career, including in this first work, Morrison portrays moments that are governed by what I refer to as an ethic of care. Her expressions of goodness are most often guided by an ethic of care. She goes on to describe a passage in which Claudia, another character in the novel, is being taken care of her by her mother. And she says, love here is neither abstract nor romantic. It is embodied in action in forms of maternal care. Here, love is equated with care, and care is life-giving and life-affirming. And so I thank each of you for these reflections that were life-giving and life-affirming. I know for me, and I know for many of our panelists who are just pouring on the praise in the chat. And I thank you so much for being with us. So please join me again in thanking our panelists for your time and for your contributions. And thank you to everyone for joining us. And we hope to see you at another event in our Feminisms Unbound